In the heart of Paris, a scent once meant for beauty begins to whisper of death, and those who breathe it never truly leave. When Eloy Verdine bottled perfection, he didn't create perfume, he captured what every soul leaves behind. Paris, 1862. The city still slept beneath a heavy mist, the kind that muffled footsteps and blurred the line between the living and the dead. Along Rue Saint-Honoré, gas lamps flickered faintly through the fog, their light trembling on slick cobblestones. The camera drifts slowly toward the church of Saint-Roch, its bell silent, its spire lost in the low gray sky. Beside it, wedged between a dressmaker's shop and a shuttered apothecary, stands a perfumery once the pride of Parisian society. Its windows are dark now, the gilt letters on its sign faded but still legible. Asterisk asterisk, Eloy Verdin, Parfumier des Étoiles. Asterisk asterisk dust, clings to the glass like frost, and behind it, empty bottles glimmer faintly in the dim light, each one holding the faintest ghost of a scent that refuses to die. Narration, low and deliberate. Asterisk. They said the air of Rue Saint-Honoré was sweeter once, that it carried the scent of violets and jasmine, a promise of beauty in every breath. But when the perfume turned sour, so did the city's memory. Asterisk. The camera lingers on the doorway. Its frame is warped from years of disuse, but the brass handle still gleams faintly as though polished by unseen hands. A passerby hurries past, crossing herself when she catches a whiff of something in the air. She will later swear it was the smell of fresh flowers and decay. The locals call it times la boutique du mort parfumé asterisk, the shop of the perfumed dead. Children dare one another to touch its door. None ever do. Some say, if you lean close enough, you can hear faint music from within a waltz carried on a breath of lavender and the whisper of glass shifting, as though someone were still working there in the dark. Inside, dust has settled over the counters like a funeral shroud. The shelves, once crowded with vials of amber liquid and crystal atomizers, now stand nearly bare. Only a few bottles remain upright, their labels curling, their contents evaporated into memory. Yet the scent persists, inexplicably strong, sweet, heavy, and wrong. Beneath the notes of rose and sandalwood lies something else, something metallic, faintly human. A narrator's voice cuts through the silence again. Softer now, almost reverent. Asterisk. Every fragrance tells a story of longing, of memory, of what we choose to preserve. But some stories were never meant to linger in the air. Some should have faded. Asterisk. The camera pans to the back of the shop where a cracked mirror reflects only shadows. In its center, an outline of dust marks where a man once stood each morning, blending his creations as sunlight poured through the window. That man's name, Eloy Verdin, has not been spoken aloud in years. Yet, even now, when the church bells toll midnight and the mist creeps low across the stones, Paris still remembers his final perfume. A scent that outlasted its maker. A fragrance that smells unmistakably of death. He was once called the nose of Paris. Eloy Verdin, a man whose delicate hands could capture the essence of spring rain or the faint warmth of a lover's neck and seal it in a glass vial. His boutique on Rue Saint-Honoré was not merely a shop, it was a temple to scent. From dawn until dusk, carriages lined the narrow street, their passengers stepping down in clouds of lace and powder. Duchesses came draped in silk, courtesans cloaked in secrets, all drawn by the invisible art that Eloy conjured from his amber bottles. They said he could distill emotion, that his perfumes did not mask one's nature but revealed it. One drop of his asterisk éternel hivertimes could make even the coldest heart weep. In the portraits of that era, Eloy appears modest, a thin man in his mid-30s, hair slicked neatly back, his eyes soft yet unreadable. He dressed simply, preferring the muted tones of gray and cream, as though unwilling to compete with the colors of his creations. But those who knew him intimately described something else, something quietly unsettling. His voice, they said, carried an intensity that belied his calm demeanor, as though every syllable was measured like an ingredient in a fragile formula. He smiled often, yet it never reached his eyes. And when he inhaled, people swore they could feel him assessing them, not their beauty, but their scent. Aloy's perfumes were miracles of precision. His workshop, hidden behind the boutique, was an alchemist's dream. Copper stills gleaming in lamplight, rows of jars labeled in fine script, and notebooks filled with careful measurements, arcane symbols, and strange annotations written in a blend of Latin and French. He sought not merely to please the senses but to perfect them. Each blend was a pursuit of something beyond human, a fragrance that could evoke purity, love, even eternity itself. But genius often carries rot beneath the surface. Those who worked under him spoke of sleepless nights, of Aloy pacing the floor until dawn, muttering that he could smell imperfections in the air. He dismissed apprentices without warning, claiming their very presence spoiled the balance of his compositions. Competitors began to whisper that Verdun's perfumes were not of flowers alone, that their unnerving allure came from something darker, something too intimate, too alive. When critics mocked his newest creation, soufflé de l'ange calling it the odor of a dying saint, Aloy did not defend himself. He simply smiled that soft, knowing smile. They only mock, he said, because they cannot understand what perfection costs. And from that moment, those close to him noticed a change. The gentle perfumer of Paris began to withdraw from society. His laughter faded, his greetings turned perfunctory. The light of Rue Saint-Honoré dimmed, and within his shuttered workshop, Aloy Verdun began to pursue a new fragrance, one that would make him immortal, no matter what it required. It began with a commission from the highest of heights, an invitation sealed with the imperial crest, delivered to Rue Saint-Honoré by a liveried messenger. Aloy Verdun had been chosen to create a fragrance for Empress Eugénie herself, to debut at the summer ball at the Tuileries Palace. For weeks, he worked behind locked doors, emerging only to test faint vapors upon silk ribbons. The scent, he promised, would be divine. A union of innocence and desire, a perfume that would make the wearer unforgettable. He named it times L'aube céleste, times heaven's dawn. When the night arrived, Paris glittered beneath a canopy of chandeliers. The Empress descended the marble staircase in a gown of pale gold, a small crystal vial resting at her throat. As she passed, courtiers murmured in awe. The scent was unlike anything they had known, floral, yes, but laced with something ethereal, something that stirred memory and melancholy all at once. For a moment, Aloy Verdun was a god among men, standing at the edge of the ballroom, watching as his creation wrapped the nobility in invisible threads of wonder. But beauty, like perfume, can turn quickly. Before the second waltz began, whispers rose from the corners of the room. The Empress paled, clutching her fan. A duke stumbled mid-dance, gasping. One by one, the guests complained of dizziness, nausea, a strange metallic taste in the back of the throat. The music faltered. Servants rushed to open windows, but the scent lingered thick, cloying, suffocating. What had been divine now seemed unholy. By dawn, 2 guests lay dead. Dozens more took ill. The newspapers called it the perfumed plague of Paris. No one doubted who was to blame. Aloy was summoned to the Hôtel de Ville for questioning, his formula confiscated. Though the official inquiry found no known poison, public opinion had already rendered its verdict. The perfumer who killed the ball, they called him. His name, once spoken with admiration, became a curse whispered over morning coffee. Within a week, creditors descended. The shop on Rue Saint-Honoré was seized, the elegant sign torn down, its gilded letters cracked beneath the boots of angry apprentices. Aloy's fortune evaporated like alcohol on glass. He was left with nothing but his notebooks and the smell of failure clinging to his skin. What no one saw was the calm that overtook him as the shutters were nailed closed. He did not rage or plead. He simply watched, his expression serene, as if he had expected this betrayal all along. In his private notes, written that same evening, he recorded a single line, asterisk. They breathed my gift and called it poison. They have forgotten that divinity always exacts a price. Asterisk. From that moment, Eloy Verdun ceased to be a perfumer for the living. He began to dream of a scent no mortal could mock, one drawn not from flowers or oils, but from the very essence of those who wronged him. The fragrance of their sins, the perfume of their souls. He returned to Montmartre under the cover of fog, a shadow among the cities forgotten. Once, Eloy Verdun had descended from this hilltop to conquer Paris with fragrance and grace. Now, he climbed back up like a ghost seeking its grave. The house on Rue des Martyrs had belonged to his late mother, a quiet seamstress who had stitched dreams for others while her son bottled them in glass. It stood at the end of a narrow lane, crooked and gray, its shutters warped from decades of rain. He arrived with nothing but a single trunk inside, a few vials, a set of instruments, and the remnants of the formula that had destroyed him. The neighbors recognized him, of course. They watched from behind lace curtains as he hauled his belongings through the mud, the once celebrated perfumer of Rue Saint-Honoré, now reduced to a pale silhouette in a threadbare coat. At first, they whispered with pity, later with fear. For within weeks, the quiet of the street began to change. At night, faint lights glowed behind his shuttered windows. Strange smells crept into the air, sometimes the sweetness of orange blossom, sometimes the acrid sting of iron and smoke. On some nights, the perfume was exquisite, almost divine, drifting through the alleys like a forgotten hymn. But as dawn approached, the scent would curdle into something else, fetid, sour, and unmistakably human. The butcher's wife swore she smelled something like burnt hair. A milk boy claimed he saw jars stacked by the window, each holding something pale that floated, half hidden by liquid amber. Inside that house, Eloy worked as he once did, but with a new devotion, colder, more meticulous. The perfumer's table that had once held rose petals and ambergris now bore different offerings, shreds of cloth, fragments of bone, vials of darkened fat he rendered himself. He no longer sought beauty, he sought retribution. Each night he opened his mother's old mirror, using it not to watch himself age, but to whisper to his reflection, naming the nobles and courtesans who had condemned him. For each, he planned a fragrance unique, intoxicating, irreversible. He wrote in his journals again, but the words had changed. Gone were the elegant recipes and delicate descriptions. In their place were obsessions, equations of cruelty disguised as art. Asterisk, the heart note is remorse. Asterisk, he scribbled one night. Asterisk, the base fear. Asterisk, the pages stank faintly of something spoiled. When the spring thaw came, children stopped playing near Rue des Martyrs. Birds avoided the roof, and yet, when the wind shifted just so, carrying that strange mingling of roses and rot, the people of Montmartre could not help but inhale. There was something about it terrible, magnetic, unforgettable. And in the flicker of his candlelight, Eloy Verdun smiled at last. For he had rediscovered his purpose, not as a servant of beauty, but as its executioner. The pages of Eloy Verdun's notebooks tell a story no perfumer should ever write. The first entries appear harmless enough formulas for lilac tinctures, notes on musk, sketches of distillation apparatus, but as the months in exile passed, the handwriting darkened, the ink pressed deeper into the paper as though gouged by a trembling hand. The diagrams became grotesque studies of anatomy, glands sliced open, nasal passages mapped like rivers, cross-sections of the human body labeled not with scientific precision, but poetic cruelty. Beneath one sketch of a severed wrist he had scrawled, asterisk, the pulse carries the memory of scent, capture it before it cools. Asterisk. By lamplight, he studied not flowers but flesh. To Eloy, the body itself had become a garden, its hidden corners ripe for harvesting. Fat could preserve aroma, sweat could bind it, and blood, always blood, he believed was the true essence, the base note of humanity. He filled page after page with observations, some written in Latin, others in a personal shorthand that even the most patient reader could not decipher. The notebooks smelled faintly of tallow and ether, as though the very act of writing them was an act of distillation. The narrator's voice drifts over this silent montage. Asterisk. He believed scent was the soul's residue, and that to capture one's essence, one must begin with the flesh. In the cellar of the house on Rue des Martyrs, Aloy had built a new kind of laboratory. Copper stills hissed softly beside wooden vats, once used for dyeing fabrics. The shelves were lined with glass jars filled not with petals, but with what the authorities would later describe as organic matter of indeterminate origin. He treated the human form as another ingredient, its decay a note to be refined. He charted how long after death the scent of a person lingered, how grief itself had an odor when trapped in fabric. One entry reads, asterisk, sorrow is aldehydic, sharp, metallic. It burns at first, then sweetens. Asterisk. He experimented on everything he could obtain, hair, teeth, fingernails, and once, according to his own admission, a hand gifted by the river. He wrote of it tenderly, as though speaking of a flower he had plucked too soon. He studied decomposition with the same passion he once reserved for jasmine. Asterisk. When life leaves the vessel, asterisk, he wrote, asterisk, it leaves behind a scent so pure, so unearthly, that only death can make it bloom. Asterisk. In time, Aloy ceased writing about perfumes altogether. He began referring to his work as transference. The line between creator and corpse blurred. To him, fragrance had become resurrection, an act of reclaiming what heaven had taken. And in the suffocating stillness of his cellar, as the candlelight flickered against jars of pale matter suspended in oil, the perfumer smiled faintly. He had found a way to make the dead speak again through scent, through memory, through him. Paris rediscovered Aloy Verdon in the spring of 1863. His exile had ended as quietly as it began. Without announcement or fanfare, the perfumer's name reappeared on a modest brass plaque above a narrow door off the Boulevard des Italiens. The new atelier was smaller, almost humble, yet those who stepped inside said it felt less like a shop and more like a sanctuary. The air shimmered with fragrance, heavy and intimate, as though the walls themselves exhaled secrets. Gone was the warmth of roses and citrus that had defined his early career. What remained was subtler, darker, something that lingered on the skin like a confession. Among the first to visit was Madeleine Duval, the celebrated soprano of the Théâtre Impérial. Her fame was legend, her beauty even more so. She had known Aloy once, before his fall from grace, and had worn his perfumes as talismans of triumph. Now, perhaps out of pity or curiosity, she came to see what remained of him. Witnesses recalled her arrival that evening, a carriage gliding to a stop beneath a gas lamp, her silhouette framed in silk and smoke. She entered the atelier alone. What passed between them in those hours is left to speculation. Some said she had come seeking a new scent for her upcoming performance in Time's Faust asterisk, something ethereal, something that could capture the soul of a woman loved by the devil. Others whispered she came not as a client but as a muse. A neighbor remembered hearing faint music late that night, an aria drifting through the shutters, followed by silence. Madeleine Duval was never seen again. The police investigation yielded little. Her maid reported she had gone out with her emerald shawl but never returned. The perfumer was questioned, of course, but his calm demeanor disarmed suspicion. He claimed she had left shortly after sunset, laughing, promising to return for the final blend. No trace of her carriage was ever found. The river dragged for weeks, to no avail. In time, her disappearance joined the litany of Parisian mysteries, the kind society mourns for a season before forgetting. Weeks later, the newspapers carried an announcement that startled the fashionable elite. Asterisk, Verdun Parfums returns introducing No. 47, Aria Mortelle. Asterisk. The advertisements described it as the scent of longing immortalized. The number referred, it was said, to the bottle he had been working on when inspiration struck. Those who sampled it were entranced. It was unlike anything in memory, floral yet mournful, with a strange warmth that felt almost human. One critic called it the smell of a dying song. Another wrote that it made him weep without knowing why. Among those who had known Madeline, the reaction was more chilling. Her dresser, upon smelling the perfume, fainted outright, later insisting that it was identical to the scent of the singer's dressing room, the mixture of lilies, powder, and candle wax that always clung to her after a performance. Patrons swore that when they uncorked the vial, they heard a faint echo, as if someone were taking a breath before singing. The perfume sold out within days. Eloy Verdun said nothing to the press. He refused interviews, retreated into his atelier, and continued his work. But those who passed by late at night spoke of a figure standing motionless in the upstairs window, the glow of a single lamp behind him. The air thick with the scent of lilies and something else. Something that might have been grief or perhaps triumph. And on the counter of the atelier, among the rows of crystal bottles, one space was forever left empty, as though waiting for a return that would never come. Paris has always carried its dead beneath its feet. Beneath the grand boulevards and polished salons stretched a labyrinth of bone and shadow catacombs older than memory, where 6 million souls slept in ordered silence. For centuries they had lain undisturbed, a city beneath the city, until the rumors began. At first, they were dismissed as the fancies of grave robbers and drunk laborers. Tales of footsteps echoing in sealed corridors, of candles flickering to life where no air should stir. But by the autumn of 1863, the whispers had taken shape. Someone was down there, moving among the skulls. Someone who left behind the faintest trace of lavender and rot. Eloy Verdun's name was not spoken aloud, but everyone knew who it meant. He had become a mythic figure again, not of beauty this time, but of dread. The perfumer who had once crafted dreams for the living was now said to steal the remnants of the dead. Night watchmen in the ossuary claimed to see a man wandering the tunnels after midnight, lantern low, his coat brushing the walls of bone. He carried a leather satchel and a small brass still, stopping now and then to kneel beside a pile of femurs as though in prayer. The smell he left behind lingered long after he vanished, sweet, sharp, unforgettable. Miners working on new sewer passages swore they found strange residue near the old burial chambers. Melted wax, bits of fabric stained dark, and traces of oil scented with jasmine and something unmistakably organic. One described it to a newspaper reporter as the perfume of someone who should not be remembered. Soon after, he fell ill and refused to return underground. Those who dared venture deeper told of sealed tunnels suddenly open, of shadows that moved against the direction of light. One mason, drunk on cheap wine, claimed he saw Verdun's pale face reflected in a puddle of stagnant water, though the man himself stood behind him. Another said he heard humming, soft and melodic, echoing through the stone corridors, an aria without words. Each story differed in detail, yet all shared that one impossible scent, lavender overlaid with something putrid, a fragrance that didn't fade but clung to the breath. Above ground, the rumors festered. Patrons whispered of perfumes too real, too human. A few even claimed to recognize something disturbingly familiar in Eloy's new fragrances, the faint sweetness of someone they once knew. When confronted, the perfumer smiled as always, the same gentle smile that once charmed duchesses and now unsettled them. "Paris is full of memory," he said. "The air remembers everything that has passed through it. I merely collect what it offers." That winter, the catacombs were sealed to the public after several workers disappeared without trace. Officials blamed unstable tunnels. The people of Paris knew better. They said the perfumer had found what he was looking for in the dark, that the city's dead had become his garden, and from them, he was distilling eternity. It began as a curiosity among scholars, a bottle of perfume that seemed to defy the natural order. The vial, slender and unmarked, had been purchased from a widow who claimed it was a gift from Monsieur Verdun himself. She sold it cheaply to a collector, who in turn passed it to a chemist at the Sorbonne. A man named Etienne Roux. Roux was not a superstitious man. He approached scent as a science, a language of molecules and reactions. Yet when he uncorked the bottle that evening in his laboratory, he found himself hesitating. The perfume inside was colorless, almost luminous, its vapor curling through the air like smoke rising from a candle just snuffed out. It smelled of violets, rain, and something faintly electric, something alive. At first, he was entranced, then came the unease. The fragrance shifted with every breath, revealing new layers as though it were aware of being studied. One moment, it was delicate, almost divine. The next, cloying, heavy, and strangely warm. Roux's assistant complained of nausea and fled the room. Alone, Roux began his analysis. Under the lamplight, he examined the residue left on a glass rod. Its composition baffled him: traces of aldehydes, fatty esters, and an unknown protein structure that resisted breakdown even under heat. The scent clung to everything it touched, refusing to disperse. He documented each test meticulously, his handwriting growing more erratic as the hours passed. What he found was impossible: no botanical base, no floral extract, no trace of animal musk or resin. Instead, his instruments detected elements consistent with organic tissue, microscopic fragments resembling cells. The chemist froze. He had studied decay before, the slow chemistry of rot, and he knew that smell, faint and unmistakable. This perfume contained it, woven so delicately within sweetness that it took the mind several moments to recognize the truth. It smelled not of flowers, but of life suspended between freshness and death. Roux sealed the vial immediately, yet the odor persisted, seeping from the stopper, insinuating itself into the curtains, his skin, his dreams. That night he recorded his final observation in trembling script. Asterisk. It bears the warmth of a living body, not imitation actual presence. This is scent extracted not from plant or beast, but from man. Asterisk. Days later, the chemist failed to appear for his lectures. When colleagues entered his laboratory, they found the windows open despite the winter chill, papers scattered, and the vial shattered on the floor. The room smelled faintly of lilac and blood. Rumors spread through the university, whispers that Roux had gone mad, that he'd spoken of the perfume whispering to him, urging him to breathe it deeper. The Sorbonne hushed the matter, sealing his notes and forbidding further analysis. But the story leaked into salons and parlors nonetheless, where the fashionable spoke of it in trembling fascination. The perfume that contained no flower, no essence of earth, only the ghost of something human. And in his atelier on Boulevard des Italiens, Eloy Verdun smiled quietly as he prepared another vial, identical to the one that had vanished. He murmured to himself as he sealed it with wax. Asterisk. Science can dissect the body, but only I can preserve the soul. Asterisk. The invitations were never written. They arrived in whispers passed between gloved hands at salons, murmured behind fans at the opera, exchanged in coded phrases over brandy and cigar smoke. Eloy Verdun had returned to favor, not in the glittering courts of the empire, but in a far more secret world, a private society of collectors who sought sensations denied to ordinary men and women. They called themselves times les amateurs du parfum vérité * the aesthetes of true fragrance. To the outside world, they were doctors, artists, aristocrats, men of philosophy and means. But in the dim candlelight of Eloy's hidden atelier, they became supplicants, worshippers before an altar of scent. It began with a rumor that Verdun had perfected a series of perfumes unlike anything in history. He called them times les vertus, times the virtues, and each was said to embody not merely an emotion, but a soul. There was times innocence asterisk, pale as morning dew, worn by those who craved purity they could never reclaim. Asterisk desire asterisk, a crimson fragrance of heat and shadow, rumored to quicken the pulse of anyone near it. Asterisk, remorse asterisk, cold and metallic, lingering like a memory that would not die. None of them appeared in public shops. They existed only in quiet exchanges behind locked doors, purchased for obscene sums and delivered in black velvet boxes sealed with wax. The clientele was carefully chosen. Eloy vetted each patron himself, studying their eyes, their breath, the way they flinched when he leaned too close. They thought themselves connoisseurs of beauty, but he saw them as ingredients. He listened as they confessed their hungers, the adulterer seeking redemption, the surgeon chasing ecstasy, the duchess longing for innocence lost, and he promised each a scent tailored to their longing. They never questioned how he achieved such intimacy in a fragrance, how he could make it smell of their own secret hearts. Those who wore his perfumes described strange sensations. The wearer of Time's innocence times claimed to dream of laughter and sunlight, though she had long since forgotten both. A painter who wore Time's desire times found his hands trembling as though guided by another will. The physician who purchased Time's remorse times hung himself within a week, the scent of his own perfume still clinging to the rope. Eloy accepted each new tragedy with quiet satisfaction, adding a single notation in his ledger beside the name of the buyer. Asterisk, returned to source. Asterisk. Paris's hidden elite began to treat his creations as relics, even miracles. They met in secret apartments and unmarked townhouses, comparing their vials by candlelight, breathing in what they swore were fragments of the human soul. Some said they felt watched as they did seen by something beyond comprehension, as though the perfume itself were conscious. And through it all, Eloy remained their high priest of scent, calm, smiling, tireless. He no longer needed to chase beauty. He had found a way to bottle it, to own it, to sell it back to those who had once scorned him. In the end, no one noticed the pattern, the way each new perfume coincided with another disappearance in the city. An actress, a surgeon's assistant, a poet's mistress, each gone without trace. Ach, virtue reborn in glass. And in the quiet hours before dawn, Eloy Verdon would lift one of his vials to the light, watching the faint shimmer within, and whisper, almost tenderly, asterisk, they live on. And they will never leave me. Asterisk. The letters of Henriette Rousseau were discovered decades later, tucked inside a tin box beneath the floorboards of a condemned boarding house in the 9th arrondissement. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded to the color of dried blood, but the words remained clear enough to chill whoever read them. She had been a laundress by trade, a widow with no children, hired by Eloy Verdon to keep his linens and garments in order. In her first letter, dated February 1864, she wrote to her cousin in Lyon with cautious excitement. Asterisk. Monsieur Verdun is not like the other men of Paris. He speaks softly, always polite, but his eyes, mon Dieu, when he looks at you, it is as if he smells your thoughts. Asterisk. Her tone darkened with each letter that followed. The next spoke of late nights and strange deliveries, crates brought to the atelier under cover of darkness, always damp, always heavy. She was forbidden to open them. He says they contain the flowers of the Orient, she wrote, but no flower I have washed leaves such stains. She described the sweet vapors that rose from the trapdoor at the back of the atelier, a warmth that carried both fragrance and sickness. It is the smell of heaven and hell together, she confessed. When I breathe it, I dream of faces I do not know. By the third letter, her words had grown frantic. She wrote that she had seen jars in the cellar, dozens of them, arranged on wooden shelves. Each jar was filled with a pale liquid that shimmered faintly when touched by light. Beneath the glass floated shapes she could not name. They have labels, she wrote, each one written by his own hand. Asterisk Madeleine, Colette, Anne-Marie, asterisk. She insisted that one jar seemed to move when she brushed past it, that something inside shifted, as though disturbed by her presence. She wrote that Verdun had begun speaking to her differently, gentler, more familiar, yet filled with an unease she could not understand. He asked if I believed that scent could hold memory, she recounted. I said yes, that my husband's shirt still carries him after all these years. He smiled and said, "Then you understand everything I do." The final letter was brief, written in an uneven hand. Last night, I woke to find him standing at the foot of my bed. He said he had discovered a new fragrance, one born from loyalty. He said he needed my help to finish it. I am afraid, but he promises I shall live forever through it. No further correspondence followed. Henriette Rousseau's room was found empty a week later. Her belongings neatly folded, her wash basin full of water tinged pink. The neighbors assumed she had fled the city, like so many others of her kind. But in Éloi Verdun's private ledger, beneath the column marked Times Les Vertus asterisk, a new name appeared, Times Fidélité asterisk, and beside it, a single note written in his immaculate script, asterisk, warm, domestique, enduring. The journalist's name was Lucien Armand, a young writer for Times Le Courrier de Paris asterisk, known for his exposés on the city's hidden underbelly. He had heard the stories for months of perfumes that haunted, of disappearances that trailed behind their release, and he was determined to uncover the truth. It was said that Éloi Verdun no longer received clients in daylight, that his atelier remained shuttered until dusk, and that only those with invitations ever saw the inside. So Lucien disguised himself as a porter, a man delivering casks of alcohol from a supplier in Montmartre. It was a simple ruse, and one that granted him a single hour inside the perfumer's sanctum. His notes, recovered years later from his effects, paint a portrait both mesmerizing and horrific. Asterisk. The air is thick with fragrance. Asterisk, he wrote. Asterisk. Every breath is an assault of sweetness and corruption. It clings to the tongue. I cannot tell where the perfume ends and rot begins. Asterisk. The workshop was a strange cathedral of glass and brass. Shelves rose to the ceiling, crowded with bottles, jars, and coiled tubes that hissed faintly in the lamplight. Along the far wall stood a table covered in instruments: forceps, scalpels, mortars stained with dark residue. Among them, a set of embalming tools gleamed with surgical precision. Lucien described how Verdun moved through the space graceful, silent, almost priestly. The perfumer greeted him without suspicion, instructing him to place the delivery near the back of the cellar. There, Lucien caught sight of the infamous vials, rows upon rows of them, each stoppered with wax and marked by a single word. Some were names, others simply emotions. Asterisk desire, faith, lamentation. Asterisk within, he swore, a faint shimmer pulsed, as though something inside was alive and breathing. He feigned ignorance, waiting until Éloi left to tend to a distillation apparatus, then opened his notebook and began to write. His observations grew increasingly fevered. Asterisk. He distills what we cannot describe, the memory of a person through scent. He is making ghosts in bottles. Asterisk. He noted that the liquid seemed to respond to movement, trembling when he drew near. A faint hum filled the air, low and mournful, not from any machine but from the vials themselves. When Éloi returned, Lucien tried to question him, to draw out a confession. "You believe in death," the perfumer said softly, "but not in what lingers after. You bury flesh, yet forget that the air remembers." "I simply preserve what the wind forgets." His eyes shone with a quiet fervor, the look of a man who believed himself a savior. Lucien fled before midnight, carrying only his notes and a single stolen vial hidden in his coat. He never published his article. Days later, his landlady found his room empty, his desk overturned, his window wide open to the rain. The only thing left behind was his notebook, its last page stained with oil and a faint scent of rose and decay. The handwriting trailed off mid-sentence. Asterisk. It breathes when I sleep. I think it knows my name. Asterisk. It was the winter of 1864 when the invitations began to circulate handwritten notes on cream paper, sealed in black wax and delivered by unseen messengers. There was no address, no signature, only a date and an hour. Asterisk midnight. Asterisk. Those who received them were among the privileged few who still spoke Eloy Verdane's name in reverent whispers. The city's elite thought him mad, damned, or both. But for a certain circle of the curious and the decadent, madness had become fashionable. The promise of forbidden sensation lured them as surely as perfume itself. When the appointed night arrived, a dozen carriages crept through the fog toward Verdun's atelier on the Boulevard des Italiens. Behind the curtains, the workshop had been transformed. Candles burned low in crystal holders, their light diffused through a haze of smoke that shimmered like mist on a grave. The air was thick, too thick with fragrance. It wasn't one scent, but many, layered upon each other in a symphony of contradiction. Rose and myrrh, sugar and ash, something warm and terribly familiar, like the skin of a lover long buried. The guests arrived masked, though not for disguise, for ritual. They were painters, courtesans, physicians, philosophers, all devotees of Eloy's art. At the center of the room stood their host, dressed in black velvet, his pale hands gloved, his eyes gleaming like glass. He spoke softly, yet his voice carried. "You have all sought beauty beyond the reach of mortal senses," he said. "Tonight, you shall touch eternity." He unveiled a single bottle resting on a pedestal of obsidian. It was small, unadorned, filled with a colorless liquid that seemed to pulse faintly in the candlelight. Asterisk éternité, asterisk, he announced. A perfume of remembrance. One drop, and you will feel the presence of those you have lost, not as memory, but as being. The guests, intoxicated by the promise, queued one by one, as Eloy dabbed the scent upon their wrists. Some laughed, others wept. A woman cried out that she could feel her child's arms around her. A man whispered a name and collapsed to his knees, trembling with joy and terror. As the hours passed, the atmosphere grew feverish. The scent deepened, changing, thickening. The candles sputtered, the air quivered, and a strange stillness settled over the room. Then came the first scream. A doctor, his face wet with tears, clawed at his own skin, shrieking that something unseen was trying to climb inside him. Another guest, a noblewoman, began to choke as though swallowing invisible hands. By dawn, 2 bodies lay cold among the toppled chairs and broken glass. When the police arrived, the atelier was deserted. The guests who survived could remember little, only the scent, heavy and inescapable, lingering in their lungs. The bottle of asterisk éternité asterisk was gone, though witnesses swore they saw Eloy cradling it as he slipped out into the fog, whispering to it like a lover. Days later, rumors spread through Paris that the dead from that night were buried without their eyes, their coffins sealed with wax. And those who had breathed the perfume too deeply spoke of strange visitations, soft voices in empty rooms, the warmth of unseen hands brushing their cheeks. They said asterisk éternité asterisk had worked exactly as promised. It had brought back the dead. It simply forgot to let them go. Inspector Marceau Delatour was not a man of superstition. He believed in evidence, in blood beneath the fingernails and fibers clinging to torn fabric, not in ghosts or curses. Yet by the spring of 1865, even he could not deny that something unnatural had taken root in Paris. They called them the Perfumer murders, the disappearances that left behind no bodies, only the lingering trace of scent. Women and men alike, all last seen near the atelier of Eloy Verdun, the perfumer who had once crafted dreams and now seemed to bottle something far darker. Delatour had been assigned the case after the failure of 3 predecessors. Each had withdrawn their reports, citing personal disturbances. He read their notes with a raised brow, descriptions of perfume so vivid it caused hallucinations, of sleepless nights haunted by fragrance. He dismissed it as hysteria, the product of minds too weak for the city's rot. But the deeper he went, the more the city began to change beneath his nose. His investigation began at the morgue on Quai de l'Archevêché, where the unclaimed dead waited behind fogged glass. The attendant led him to a row of corpses found near the Seine. They were untouched by violence, their skin pale and dry, as if drained of something vital. Each body, the attendant whispered, had smelled the same sweet, faintly floral, yet undeniably human. Delatour leaned close and inhaled. The scent was delicate, almost beautiful, and in that instant, something inside him recoiled. It reminded him of the warmth of a woman's hair after rain. The intimacy of it was unbearable. From there, he followed the trail to the flower markets near Les Halles, where the women who sold roses and violets spoke of a man buying in bulk, always at night, always paying in gold. The older vendors claimed his flowers never wilted, as though preserved by unseen hands. Delatour questioned them all, his handkerchief pressed to his face, yet the smell clung to him faint, ghostly, inescapable. In the sewers beneath the city, where the river of filth ran black and endless, he found his final confirmation. The workers had reported a chamber recently opened, its walls lined with glass jars. Some still contained cloudy fluid that shimmered when his lantern passed. The inspector's hand trembled as he lifted one to the light. Inside floated something unmistakably human, a lock of hair, pale and delicate, curling like a sleeping thing. That night, Delatour returned to his office with a sickness he could not name. His clothes reeked of the city's decay, but beneath it lingered another scent, faint but insistent rose and musk, touched with rot. He recorded his findings in a report no one would ever read. Asterisk. The killer works through perfume, each victim distilled, each memory preserved. He is not murdering the body, but harvesting the soul. Asterisk. In time, the inspector's demeanor changed. Colleagues spoke of his obsession, of how he would stand in the rain, inhaling the air as if listening to it. He stopped shaving, stopped sleeping, stopped speaking of anything but scent. And then, one night, he vanished from his quarters, leaving behind his coat, his revolver, and a single vial resting on his desk. The note beside it read only, asterisk. Now I understand. Asterisk. The vial was unmarked. When the clerk uncorked it, the room filled with the fragrance of violets and something faintly human, impossibly alive. The breaking of the lock echoed like a gunshot in the silence of Rue des Martyrs. Inspector Marceau Delatour stood before the heavy cellar door, lantern in one hand, revolver in the other. He had returned alone, without authorization, long after midnight. His superiors had dismissed his reports as delirium ghost stories spun by a man too long surrounded by death. But Delatour could no longer ignore what the evidence whispered through every street and morgue drawer of Paris. The truth was hidden beneath Éloy Verdin's atelier, and tonight he would see it for himself. The door gave way with a slow groan, releasing a breath of air that smelled faintly of lilies, alcohol, and something far older. The lantern light wavered as he descended the stone steps. The deeper he went, the colder it became. The walls wept moisture. The air hummed with a soft vibration that might have been the trembling of glass. And then he saw them. Rows upon rows of shelves lined the chamber, stretching farther than his light could reach. Upon them rested hundreds of flacons, small glass bottles, each sealed with wax and suspended in clear preservative oils. The lantern's flame fractured through them, scattering colors across the stone like the stained glass of a cathedral. At first, he thought they contained flowers, the petals of some exotic bloom. But when he stepped closer, his stomach turned. Inside the first bottle floated a curl of hair, coiled like smoke. The next held something pale and thin, a fingernail, polished and perfect, drifting gently in the oil. Others contained fragments of skin, teeth, even eyes that glimmered faintly as if reflecting his fear. Each bottle bore a label written in delicate script, asterisk Colette. Armand. Therese. Asterisk. The names went on, an archive of lives distilled into silence. He moved down the aisle, trembling, until his lantern caught a larger bottle placed apart from the rest. It was more ornate, its stopper engraved with a small star. The liquid within shimmered faintly, almost alive. When he lifted it to the light, something inside shifted a pale shape that might have been a hand. The label was simple, elegant, and final. Asterisk Madeline. Asterisk. Delatour's breath caught. Madeleine Duval, the vanished soprano, the woman whose voice still haunted the opera houses of Paris. He pressed the bottle closer, and for an instant he swore he saw her face forming within the fluid, eyes opening, lips parting, as though to sing. The inspector dropped it in horror, but it did not shatter. The glass only pulsed, as if it were breathing. He staggered back, his lantern shaking, casting wild shadows that seemed to move on their own. A soft sound filled the cellar, a faint melody, like humming from beneath the floor, rising and falling in waves. It was not his imagination. The bottles were resonating, vibrating as one, releasing the ghosts trapped within their crystal prisons. The air grew thick with scent violets, musk, decay, and something heartbreakingly human. Delatour turned to flee, but a voice stopped him, Eloy Verdine's, soft and close though he could see no one. "You shouldn't have come here, Inspector. They don't like to be disturbed." The lantern flickered out. In the darkness, he heard the faint clinking of glass, the whisper of liquid shifting, and the perfume so beautiful it burned. When daylight came, the door to the cellar was found ajar. The inspector was gone. Only his notebook remained, its final page scrawled with trembling words. Asterisk. The dead are not silent. They sing in bottles, and he is their conductor. Asterisk. The raid took place on a gray morning when the fog hung low over the Boulevard des Italiens like a shroud. Dozens of officers gathered outside the perfumery, their boots slick with dew, their breath visible in the chill air. By then, the stories of the singers, the courtesans, the doctors and poets had reached even the highest ranks of the prefecture. The last report from Inspector Delatour had been incoherent, little more than fevered scribbles about bottles that breathed and ghosts made of perfume. But the evidence was undeniable. People were vanishing, and every trail led back to Eloy Verdine. The command was simple: enter, arrest, and bring him alive if possible. At 9 o'clock sharp, the door to Verdin's atelier was forced open. The hinges gave way with an almost human sigh, releasing a breath of air so heavy with scent that the men faltered. The first officer to step inside retched into his handkerchief. It was not the smell of rot, but something worse. Beauty turned sour, flowers steeped in blood. The workshop was immaculate. The glass tables gleamed, each instrument aligned with unnatural precision. Hundreds of bottles stood in ordered ranks along the shelves, their contents shimmering faintly in the dim light. But there was no sign of the perfumer himself. The air still trembled with warmth, as if he had just stepped away. They searched every room. The upper floor was bare, the bed unslept in, sheets folded tight. In the cellar, they found only echoes of what had been described in Delatour's notes. Shelves stripped bare, glass shards scattered across the floor, and stains on the stone that no one wished to identify. A single candle burned at the far end, its flame steady despite the drafts, casting its light over a table where one object remained untouched: Eloy Verdine's ledger. The book lay open, its final pages inked in a hand more fluid than ever before. The entries listed his perfumes, each paired with a name, and beside the last one asterisk eternité asterisk, a single sentence stretched across the page. Asterisk. The perfect fragrance must live. Asterisk. Beneath it, a smear of something dark marred the paper, half ink, half blood. As the officers read, a faint sound filled the room, a low, rhythmic pulse, almost like breathing. The scent around them began to change. What had been floral grew metallic, tinged with iron and candle wax. One man swore he saw the wick bend as if stirred by invisible movement. Another claimed to hear whispering, soft as perfume spilled on skin. When they carried the ledger upstairs, they found their footprints gone from the dust behind them. By evening, the shop was sealed. The official report recorded the perfumer as missing, presumed fled. Yet those who were there swore that he had not fled at all, that he had dissolved into the very air he worshipped. For weeks afterward, passers-by claimed to smell jasmine drifting from the closed windows, mingled with the faintest trace of something human, like breath lingering after a final sigh. And those who lingered too long said the scent seemed to follow them home, as if the perfumer had not vanished but found a new vessel through which to live one inhalation at a time. It began just before dawn, when the bells of Saint-Roch were tolling for morning mass and the fog had yet to lift from Rue Saint-Honoré. The first to notice the fire was a carriage driver, half drunk and on his way home, who saw the flicker of orange light behind the shuttered windows of the old perfumery. Within moments, the flames burst outward, curling up the facade like living things hungry for air. By the time the alarm reached the station, the blaze had already consumed the lower floor. The street filled with people in their nightclothes, drawn by the glow and the strange, intoxicating scent that drifted through the smoke roses, unmistakably, and something else beneath it. Something metallic and warm, like blood warming in the Sunday. The fire brigade arrived in haste, but no amount of water seemed to quench the flames. They burned too cleanly, too evenly, as if feeding on the air itself. Witnesses described how the fire behaved like perfume poured on a candle's flame, rising and twisting, sending ribbons of color through the smoke. Some claimed they saw faces in it, pale outlines forming and dissolving with each gust of wind. Others swore they heard music, faint and mournful, as the windows shattered in a burst of glass and scent. By mid-morning, the entire block smelled of roses. The perfume hung so thick it made the eyes sting and the stomach turn. Even after the fire was finally subdued, the air remained sweet, impossibly so. The firemen emerged, blackened and dazed, reporting that the blaze had burned hotter than any they had known, yet left the walls strangely intact, as though the building had chosen to die from within rather than collapse. When the investigators sifted through the ruins the following day, they found little but ash and glass. The shelves had melted together into a single mass, smooth and translucent. In the center of the workshop, where Eloy Verdon's work table once stood, the glass had fused into a peculiar shape, an impression within the molten surface, unmistakably human. A silhouette with arms outstretched, as though caught mid-breath. The pattern of the features was indistinct, yet eerily familiar. Even the hardened men who stood over it refused to speak for a long while. Among the debris, they found a few unbroken bottles, their stoppers sealed by the heat. When opened, each released a faint fragrance that filled the air anew: violet, sandalwood, and the ghost of rose. It was as if the perfumer's final act had been to release his life's work into the world, one last exhalation before vanishing forever. For weeks afterward, people claimed the scent lingered in the stones of the street, in the fabric of their clothes, even in their hair. Some said the fire had not destroyed Eloy Verdon at all, but transformed him, that the perfumer had become the very essence he had spent his life pursuing. On certain mornings, when the wind blew east from Saint-Roch, Parisians swore they could still smell roses on the air, soft, mournful, and impossibly human. It was discovered by accident in the spring of 1964, more than 100 years after the fire that consumed Eloy Verdon's atelier. The auction catalogue described it only as an antique perfume bottle recovered from the Saint-Honoré ruins, circa 1,860 seconds. It sat forgotten among porcelain figurines and tarnished cutlery at a modest estate sale on the outskirts of Paris. The glass had clouded over time, its surface faintly warped, but beneath the grime it shimmered with a strange translucence, as if something within it were alive, pulsing faintly with its own light. The label was still legible, though cracked and faded. Verdun Perfumer. No title, no number, no indication of its contents. Just the name. It was purchased by a young collector named Margot Levine, a restorer of antique jewelry with a fascination for the macabre. She brought it home that evening, setting it on her mantel beneath the soft hum of her apartment's radio. The bottle was sealed tight with a cork blackened from age and waxed shut, but when she leaned close, she swore she could smell something faint, lilac, delicate and sweet, like the gardens her grandmother once tended. It was strange, almost impossible. No fragrance should have endured a century sealed in glass. Curiosity overcame caution. She fetched a small knife and began to scrape away the old wax. As the final layer flaked off, a subtle warmth spread through the air. The cork, brittle with time, should have crumbled beneath her hand, but instead, it sighed loose with a sound like an exhale. The scent that followed was overwhelming. It filled the room instantly, not sharp but enveloping floral at first, lilac and honey, then deepening into something unnameable, something faintly human. It was as if another presence had entered the room, invisible but undeniably there. Margot staggered back, heart pounding. The lights flickered once, and she thought she heard a whisper, not a word, but the suggestion of breath, soft and close to her ear. She turned, expecting to find someone behind her, but the room was empty. The perfume did not fade. It clung to the air like memory, warm and mournful, almost alive. And then she noticed the bottle. It was no longer open. The cork, which she had placed on the table, was back in its place, sealed as perfectly as before. A thin line of wax glistened at its rim, fresh, as though newly applied. When she tried to touch it, the glass was warm, not from sunlight, not from her hand, but from within. It pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat. That night, she dreamed of a man with pale eyes and a voice like smoke, whispering in the dark, asterisk. "You freed me." Asterisk. When she woke, the scent of lilac still hung in the air, though the bottle sat motionless, silent, and sealed once more. In the months that followed, the bottle changed hands several times, passed between collectors, historians, and skeptics. Each reported the same phenomenon: the scent, the warmth, the feeling of being watched. One man swore he saw condensation form inside, as if something were breathing against the glass. The last known owner refused to part with it, claiming it sings on certain nights, faint and melodic, like someone humming just beyond the veil of sleep. Whether the bottle holds air, spirit, or something far stranger, no one can say. But in the archives of the auction house, the note beside its lot number has not been altered since that first evening. Asterisk. When opened, the room smells of lilac and of someone unseen. Asterisk. By the time the bottle resurfaced in the late 20th century, Éloy Verdun had passed from myth to curiosity, a footnote in the darker corners of Parisian history. Yet the scent within that bottle defied every principle of chemistry. In the sterile halls of the Sorbonne's Department of Olfactory Studies, a team of researchers decided to unravel the mystery once and for all. Their tools were precise, their methods modern, their skepticism absolute. What they did not anticipate was how quickly the perfume would resist their scrutiny, as if it had no interest in being understood. They began with spectral analysis. Under ultraviolet light, the liquid shimmered with shifting iridescence, its molecular structure refusing to remain stable. When they introduced a drop to distilled water, the mixture clouded, then cleared, releasing a faint fragrance that caused one of the technicians to faint. The room filled with the smell of lilac, and something else, something almost mammalian. It wasn't decay, nor the sweet musk of animal products once common in perfumery. It was warmer, closer, intimate. It smelled of skin. The lead researcher, Dr. Elodie Marchand, ran further tests, breaking the sample down into its basic chemical components. What she found made little sense. Alongside the expected esters and alcohols were compounds that should not have existed in a perfume: traces of amino acids, fragments of fatty tissue, and lipids that matched no botanical origin. The data suggested something disturbing. The perfume contained organic material consistent with human cellular matter. The discovery was dismissed as contamination until repeated tests yielded the same result. He wasn't extracting scent from flowers, Dr. Marchand said quietly, staring at the printouts. He was distilling life itself. For documentation, the university commissioned a short film to accompany their findings. The footage, still archived and seldom screened, shows slow-motion shots of the liquid trembling in glass, its surface rippling like breath. The narration is calm at first, then falters as the results unfold. He proved, the voice reads, that the essence of the human spirit can be captured not in heaven, but in scent. In later interviews, several researchers confessed to strange after effects. One spoke of hearing faint whispers when near the sample, as though the fluid were exhaling words just beyond comprehension. Another refused to enter the lab at all, insisting she could feel someone standing behind her whenever the vial was opened. The project was eventually terminated, the remaining liquid resealed and locked in a climate-controlled vault. Officially, the study concluded that the composition of the perfume could not be replicated. Unofficially, there were rumors unverified, but persistent, that one of the scientists attempted to recreate Verdun's formula on her own. Her laboratory was later found abandoned, the equipment melted, the air saturated with the scent of lilac and iron. Nothing of her remained but a notebook filled with precise chemical ratios and one final line written across the last page. Asterisk. It works, but the soul remembers. Asterisk. The Musée des Arts et Métiers unveiled the exhibition quietly, without fanfare, as though the curators themselves wished to keep its presence a secret. It was called Times les Parfums Oubliés, Times the Forgotten Fragrances, and its purpose, they claimed, was to explore the lost art of 19th-century perfumery. At its center, displayed in a climate-controlled glass case, were 6 vials attributed to Éloy Verdun, recovered from the ashes of his atelier and private collection. The curator, a woman named Madame Fournier, described them as objects of historical interest, their contents long inert. Yet from the first day, the air around the display carried an unmistakable scent, faint, alluring, impossible to place. Some said lilac. Others said roses. One guard insisted it smelled like someone breathing just behind him. The vials were arranged in a perfect arc, each labeled in Verdun's elegant hand. Asterisk innocence, desire, remorse. Eternité, asterisk. The others bore no names, only single initials etched into the glass. Visitors leaned close, drawn as if by gravity. They lingered longer than they intended, their eyes unfocused, their expressions softening into wonder or unease. By the end of the first week, reports began to circulate among the staff. Patrons collapsing without warning, others claiming to see faint shapes in the reflection of the case faces, blurred but recognizably human, pressing from the inside as though the glass itself were thin as skin. The museum dismissed these accounts at first, attributing them to suggestion, to the power of story. But the incidents grew stranger. Guards reported that after closing, the temperature near the exhibit rose several degrees, and the scent intensified until it became oppressive. One night, watchmen swore he saw condensation form on the interior of the display, as though the bottles were exhaling. Another, more shaken, said he heard humming, soft, melodic, like a woman singing an aria just beyond the range of the living. Visitors who stood too long described an overwhelming dizziness, followed by vivid hallucinations. A young student claimed he saw a ballroom filled with candlelight and figures twirling in clouds of smoke. A widow said she smelled her husband's cologne and felt a hand brush her shoulder. When the staff attempted to move the exhibit to another floor, several workers grew ill. The scent followed them home. Madame Fournier closed the installation within 3 months, citing unforeseen health complications. The vials were resealed, packed into wooden crates, and stored in the museum's archive, never to be shown again. Yet those who worked there swore that even years later, when the doors were locked and the lights dimmed, the corridor outside the storage room would fill with the faint perfume of lilac and candle wax. Sometimes, when the silence stretched too long, the night guards would hear soft footsteps echoing through the empty gallery, measured, deliberate, and perfumed. It was said that Verdun's creations had finally found their audience, and that the museum had become their theater. For what are ghosts, after all, if not memories that refuse to fade, and what is perfume, if not memory made flesh? The film fades to quiet, the noise of the city muffled as the camera moves through the narrow corridors of a private archive near the Seine. Dust hangs in the air like suspended time, catching the light that filters through high windows. The voice of the curator, a woman in her 60s with careful hands and eyes that never quite meet the lens, guides the audience through the dimness. Most of Verdun's work was lost, she says softly. But one piece remained sealed, preserved beyond explanation. We call it Time's Revenance, the return. Her words carry the gravity of ritual rather than explanation. The vial sits on a velvet-lined table beneath a single lamp. It is smaller than the others, simple in design, the glass faintly smoky, as if touched by old fire. The label is written in Verdun's own slanted hand, the ink brown with age. Beneath the name, a single phrase, pour ceux qui restent times, for those who remain. The curator hesitates before touching it, her gloved fingers trembling slightly. Around her, the room is still, yet there's a subtle movement in the air, a suggestion that something unseen is already watching. The narrator's voice begins again, calm and reverent. They say scent is the most faithful of memories. Long after faces fade and voices fall silent, the fragrance remains an echo of what once lived. The curator removes the cork. The sound is soft, almost tender, like breath escaping after years of silence. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, imperceptibly, the air begins to change. The camera trembles slightly as the operator inhales, the lens fogs with condensation. A scent fills the room, floral, faintly sweet, impossibly human. Lilac first, then jasmine, then something more elusive, warm as skin and cold as stone. The curator closes her eyes, as though transported somewhere private. It's familiar, she whispers, but I can't name it. Behind her, faintly, the sound of a door creaking though none move. Papers stir. The light flickers once. The narrator continues, the voice lower now, almost mournful. For a century, Eloy Verdun sought to capture what others let go, the soul that lingers in absence, the breath that memory leaves behind. Perhaps he succeeded. Perhaps he never vanished at all. The camera zooms closer to the vial. The liquid inside quivers, releasing thin curls of vapor that twist upward like phantoms dissolving into air. As they rise, they form shapes, faces, fleeting and fragile, like reflections caught in smoke. The curator reaches to reseal the bottle, but the cork will not fit. The vapor continues to pour, slower now, almost deliberate. Her hands fall away. It's breathing, she says faintly. The room grows darker, the light contracting to the surface of the vial. The final shot lingers on the mist unfurling across the table, shimmering faintly as it drifts toward the camera lens. The narrator delivers the closing line in a whisper. They say scent is memory made immortal, and in the city of perfume, some memories refuse to fade. The screen cuts to black. For a moment, there is only silence then, a faint exhalation, almost like the sigh of a man who has finally remembered his name.